My name is Rebecca. I am 33 years old and a forensic accountant by trade. I hunt hidden assets for a living, but I never thought the biggest fraud I would uncover would be sitting across from me at the family dinner table. Just hours after my own mother slapped my 6-year-old daughter for daring to touch a holiday cookie, I received a text from my father threatening to ruin my life over a $200,000 loan. He thought I was just a vulnerable single mother he could extort. He did not realize I had already audited his entire existence. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members who thought they could manipulate your kindness. Growing up in our upscale home in the Chicago suburbs, the holidays were never about genuine gratitude. They were strictly theatrical performances. My mother Barbara, who just turned 60, lived for these elaborate displays of wealth and perfect family optics. The massive mahogany dining table was always covered in expensive crystal and silver platters, but the emotional atmosphere was consistently suffocating. I had spent my entire life playing the role of the family scapegoat. I was the practical, boring daughter who quietly fixed everyone else's problems and maintained a perfect credit score, while my older sister Brittany was actively worshipped as the flawless golden child. Brittany is 35 now and married to Devin, a 36-year-old man who serves as the prominent sales director at my father's lucrative car dealership. Devin is a smooth-talking African-American man who perfectly fit into my parents' exclusive country club aesthetic, just as long as he kept making my father money and bringing in high-end clients. Together, Brittany and Devin could do absolutely no wrong. They lived recklessly beyond their means, entirely funded by the bank of mom and dad, while I built my career and my independent life from the ground up. This past Thanksgiving, the underlying tension in the house was thicker than usual. The formal dinner had just concluded, and the lavish desserts were finally being brought out by the catering staff. My daughter Mia, who is 6 years old, and the absolute sweetest little girl you could ever meet, had been sitting incredibly quietly through the entire 3-hour ordeal. She suddenly saw a silver tray of beautifully frosted sugar cookies placed near the center of the table. Like any normal child, she smiled brightly and reached her small hand out to take one of the treats. Before her little fingers could even brush the sweet frosting, a sharp, violent crack echoed loudly through the large dining room. My mother Barbara had reached violently across the table and slapped Mia's hand away with shocking force. The sudden physical impact immediately left a bright red mark across my daughter's delicate skin. Mia gasped loudly, her little eyes instantly wide with sheer shock and sudden welling tears. I froze in my seat, but my mother did not even blink or show a hint of remorse. She looked right down her nose at my crying child and said in an icy, calculated tone, "Those cookies are for the good grandkids, not for you." Complete stunned silence fell over the dining room for a fraction of a second before Brittany loudly snorted. Then Devin let out a loud, booming laugh that filled the room. Within moments, the entire table of relatives was chuckling, as if a grown woman striking a small child was the punchline of a brilliant comedy routine. Brittany leaned against Devin and smirked directly at me, slowly shaking her head in amusement. Devin took a massive bite of a sugar cookie and pointed a finger at me. I did not scream or cry. My profession requires me to detach my emotions from high-stress situations, and my analytical brain took over. I stood up slowly, my heavy dining chair scraping loudly against the polished hardwood floor. I walked calmly around the large table, gently picked up my quietly sobbing daughter, and held her tight against my chest to protect her. I grabbed her winter coat from the back of the chair. Devin rolled his eyes and scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Come on, Becky," he groaned loudly. "Do not make a huge scene right now. You are always way too sensitive about everything. It was just a little tap. You are ruining the holiday for everyone over a stupid cookie." I did not offer them a single word in response. I simply turned my back on the lavish dining room and walked out. We left forever in silence. The drive back to my apartment was quiet. I gripped the steering wheel tightly while checking the rearview mirror every few minutes to make sure Mia was all right. She had fallen asleep clutching her small stuffed bear with her little hand still red from my mother's unprovoked strike. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my chest. For years I had swallowed their insults and their blatant favoritism. I had let them treat me like a second-class citizen because I foolishly believed that having a toxic family was somehow better than having no family at all. But crossing the line and physically hurting my daughter was the absolute final straw. I carried Mia inside and gently tucked her into her warm bed. I went into my home office and sat down at my desk, staring out the window at the gray afternoon sky. My phone vibrated on the wooden desk. The digital clock on the screen read exactly 2:30 in the afternoon. It was a text message from my father, Thomas. He is a 62-year-old man who believes that money is the ultimate weapon to control every single person around him. The message popped up on my screen with his usual demanding tone. It read, "Do not forget the business loan payment tomorrow. You walk out on this family, I cut your funding." Anyone reading that message would automatically assume that I was just a financially unstable daughter, relying heavily on my wealthy father to survive. That was exactly the narrative my parents loved to push to their country club friends. They loved playing the role of the generous saviors keeping their struggling youngest daughter afloat. But they were living a massive lie. I did not need my father's funding. I am a highly successful forensic accountant. My entire career revolves around tearing apart complex financial records, hunting down hidden assets, and exposing massive corporate fraud. I run my own highly profitable firm, and I make more in a single quarter than Devin makes all year selling cars. The business loan my father was referring to was a $200,000 small business administration loan. 6 months ago, my father had supposedly co-signed this loan to help me expand my accounting practice. He paraded this fact around, constantly using it as a permanent leash to yank whenever I stepped out of line. But my father had made one catastrophic miscalculation. He assumed I was just a basic bookkeeper who would blindly trust family. He did not realize that my daily job involves tracing fraudulent digital footprints for federal agencies. I had already looked into the loan. I had tracked every single cent of that $200,000. I knew exactly where it actually went, and it certainly did not go into my business accounts. I picked up my phone and stared at his threatening message. A small, cold smile touched my lips. I did not type out a long, emotional paragraph. I did not beg for his understanding or try to explain why I left the dinner. I simply typed a short message. Paid. Check your email for a Thanksgiving gift. I hit send and placed the phone face down on the desk. I opened my encrypted laptop and navigated to a secure folder I had been building for the past 3 weeks. Inside was a heavily detailed 40-page document containing bank statements, wire transfer logs, and unauthorized signature verifications. I attached the secure file to an email addressed to my father. I typed the subject line carefully. Internal audit. I clicked send and watched the progress bar shoot across the screen. The trap was officially set. My father thought he was holding a financial gun to my head, but he had just handed me the exact ammunition I needed to destroy his entire fraudulent empire. Less than 2 minutes later, my phone began to ring frantically. The caller ID flashed my father's name in bright white letters. I let it ring. It stopped, and then immediately started ringing again. 10 missed calls turned into 15. He was panicking. He had opened the file and he finally realized that his quiet, obedient daughter was actually the architect of his impending downfall. The fake business loan was just the tip of the iceberg, and I was about to sink their entire ship. I leaned back in my leather chair and watched the phone light up again. They wanted a war, and I was ready to give them one. I would make sure they deeply regretted ever targeting my daughter. My profession taught me that numbers never lie, and these exact numbers would lock my own father in federal prison forever tonight. I stood up and smiled as the phone kept ringing loudly. The loud, relentless pounding on my front door started right at 7 in the morning. I had spent the entire night ignoring the frantic phone calls from him, but I knew they would not simply give up. I poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee and walked calmly toward the entryway. I checked the peephole and saw exactly who I expected. It was Brittany and Devin looking completely unhinged in the hallway. I unlocked the deadbolt, and before I could even pull the door completely open, Devin shoved his way inside. His tall, imposing frame instantly filled my small living room as he aggressively backed me toward the kitchen counter. He was wearing an expensive custom-tailored suit, but his face was twisted with absolute rage. Brittany followed closely behind him, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. She slammed the apartment door shut behind her and glared at me. Devin pointed a thick finger just inches from my face. "Are you completely out of your mind, Becky?" he yelled. His voice echoed off the walls. "You are willing to jeopardize our entire family financial security over a stupid cookie. Do you have any idea what you have done? Thomas is threatening to pull his investment capital from the dealership because you threw a pathetic temper tantrum and walked out on Thanksgiving dinner." I took a slow sip of my coffee, refusing to break eye contact or show any fear. "Is that what he told you?" I asked quietly. I kept my voice perfectly level. I watched Devin tense up. He stepped even closer, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "Do not play games with me," he sneered. "I bring in the high-rolling clients. I keep that dealership afloat, while you sit in this tiny apartment crunching numbers for pennies. If Thomas pulls my funding because you decided to play the victim, my entire sales division goes under. You are messing with my livelihood." Brittany stepped forward quickly, placing a manicured hand on his arm, while looking at me with pure disgust. She immediately slipped right into her favorite role of the long-suffering victim. "How could you be so incredibly selfish?" she whined, her voice pitched high with fake emotion. "Mom and Dad have done absolutely everything for you. Dad literally put his own neck on the line to save you, and this is how you repay him. You should be down on your knees thanking him instead of causing drama." I raised an eyebrow and leaned back against the cool granite counter. "Oh, really?" I replied. "And what exactly did Dad do to save me, Brittany?" She crossed her arms and rolled her eyes dramatically. "Do not act dense, Becky. Everyone knows about the $200,000 Small Business Administration loan. Dad had to co-sign that loan just to keep your failing little accounting firm from completely going under. He vouched for you. He used his flawless reputation to secure government funding because you could not manage your own business finances. You are drowning in debt, and you still have the audacity to walk out of his house and disrespect our mother." I listened to her recite the exact false narrative my parents had been feeding the family for 6 solid months. It was actually fascinating to watch them both blindly believe the lies. They genuinely thought I was a desperate failure hanging by a thread. They believed I was entirely dependent on the family wealth just like they were. "You are the most ungrateful person I have ever met," Devin aggressively added. His face was turning red. "You owe Thomas 200 grand and you think you can just march out of Thanksgiving dinner like you own the place. You are going to pick up your phone right now, call Thomas, apologize for your pathetic behavior, and beg for his forgiveness. If you do not do exactly what I say, I will make sure you never see another dime from this family again." I slowly set my coffee mug down on the table. The sheer arrogance rolling off them was intoxicating, because I knew exactly what was hiding in their financial records. They came into my home to bully me into submission, using a fraudulent loan as their ultimate weapon. They wanted to crush my spirit and force me back into my designated role as the family punching bag. I looked Devin directly in the eyes. I did not flinch or back away. I let the silence stretch for a few heavy seconds before I finally spoke. "I am not calling anyone, Devin," I said smoothly. "You are standing here screaming about a loan that you both clearly know absolutely nothing about. I am never going to apologize to Thomas again." Devin let out a harsh laugh and threw his hands up. He looked at Brittany like I had completely lost my mind. "You are delusional, Becky," he scoffed. "Thomas literally has the paperwork. We have all seen the loan documents with your name on them. You cannot just deny reality because you are throwing a tantrum. I did not raise my voice. I simply turned my back to them and walked calmly over to my oak desk. I set my coffee mug down next to my monitor. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I unclasped the metal tab and slid out a stack of crisp official government papers. I walked back over to the kitchen counter and threw the heavy stack of documents down in front of Devin. He flinched slightly at the loud smack of the paper hitting the granite. "Read it," I commanded. My voice was void of any emotion. Devin looked down at the papers and then back up at me with a bewildered expression. "What is this?" he demanded. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the counter. "Those are the official Small Business Administration loan documents, Devin. The exact same $200,000 loan you are currently screaming at me about. The loan my father supposedly co-signed to save my failing accounting firm." I reached out and tapped my index finger firmly on the bottom of the third page. "Look at the signature line," I instructed. Brittany leaned in close, peering over his muscular shoulder. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the page. "That is your signature, Becky," she said dismissively. "It has your name printed right below it in black and white." I shook my head slowly. "No, Brittany, it is not my signature. It is a very sloppy forgery of my signature. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my entire life authenticating financial documents for federal court cases. I know exactly what my own legal signature looks like, and I certainly did not sign this paperwork." Devin crossed his arms over his broad chest. "So what?" he sneered defensively. "You are claiming Thomas forged it. Why would a millionaire car dealer forge a measly $200,000 loan for a business he does not even own?" I looked at him with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. Because Devin Thomas is not a millionaire anymore? His dealership has been bleeding cash for 3 consecutive years. He is drowning in terrible debts and shady off-the-books deals. He desperately needed liquid cash to avoid bankruptcy, but his personal credit is completely destroyed. The banks laughed him right out of their offices, so he used the one asset in the family that still held pristine financial value. He used my flawless credit score and my social security number to secure government relief funds illegally. Brittany gasped dramatically, placing a hand over her chest. "You are lying," she shrieked loudly. "Dad would never do something illegal. He is a respected businessman in the community. You are just making up insane conspiracy theories to get out of paying him back." I ignored her completely and kept my eyes locked onto Devin. His arrogant posture was beginning to slip. A small bead of sweat formed near his hairline. "But here is the most interesting part, Devin," I continued smoothly. "I did a full audit on the funds. When the federal government approved that $200,000 loan, the money did not go into my accounting firm account. It did not even go into Thomas' personal bank account. It was systematically wired in 4 separate installments of $50,000 directly into your private offshore checking account." The color instantly drained from his face. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "You see, Devin? I know exactly what you both have been doing," I said, leaning even closer. "Thomas needed the money to cover his massive losses at the dealership, but he could not deposit federal relief funds directly into a failing business without triggering an immediate tax audit. So he used you. He funneled the stolen government cash right into your accounts, and you quietly moved the money around to make it look like legitimate luxury car sales. You are not a brilliant sales director, Devin. You are a highly active participant in federal wire fraud and money laundering, and the best part is that I have every single bank statement to prove it." Brittany looked back and forth between us. Her eyes were wide with rising panic. "Devin, tell her she is lying," she demanded, pulling on his suit sleeve. "Tell her she is making this up right now." Devin stood paralyzed. He just stared in horror at the documents. The heavy silence in my kitchen was suddenly shattered by the sharp ringing of my cell phone resting on the counter. Devin and Brittany both jumped at the sudden noise. I glanced down at the bright screen. It was my mother, Barbara, calling. I picked up the phone and pressed the green answer button, putting the call on speaker so my uninvited guests could hear every single word. I did not say hello, I just waited for her to speak. The sound of dramatic, forced sobbing echoed through the small speaker. Rebecca. My mother wailed, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. How could you do this to us? Your father is currently pacing the floor having a panic attack. You are tearing this family apart. I stared blankly at Devon, who was still visibly sweating. I am tearing the family apart, I asked calmly. Mom, you slapped my 6-year-old daughter hard enough to leave a physical mark because she reached for a sugar cookie. Then Dad tried to extort me over a fraudulent federal loan he took out using my stolen identity. But yes, please tell me how I am the villain here. Her fake crying stopped instantly. Her tone shifted from a weeping victim to a cold, commanding matriarch in a fraction of a second. We are your family, she snapped sharply. Family helps family. Your father built that dealership from the ground up, and he hit a rough patch. He only used your information because he knew you had the credit score to save us. He was going to pay it all back eventually. You are being incredibly selfish making this a legal issue instead of handling it in-house like blood relatives should. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. He stole $200,000 from the federal government, Mom. He committed multiple felonies and funneled the cash to Devon. I am a licensed forensic accountant. If I know about this and do not report it, I lose my license, my career, and my freedom. You expect me to go to federal prison for you. You would not go to prison, she dismissed, waving off the severity of the situation. You are just being dramatic as usual. If you go to the police over this, Rebecca, I swear to you, I will make your life a living hell. I will take the one thing you actually care about. A cold chill ran down my spine, but I kept my face completely expressionless. What exactly does that mean? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. It means I will call Child Protective Services this afternoon, she threatened confidently. I will tell them you are an unfit mother. I will tell them your demanding career keeps you working insane hours and that you constantly neglect Mia. I will say you have severe mental health issues and that your living environment is unsafe for a child. I gripped the edge of the granite counter so hard my knuckles turned white. You would never get away with that, I stated firmly. I have a perfect record and a spotless home. You have zero proof of any neglect. Proof is just a matter of who can afford the best lawyers. Rebecca, she sneered, your father has millions of dollars in resources. We know the best family court judges in the county. We play golf with the politicians. We will drag you through court for years until you are completely bankrupt. We will paint you as a paranoid, unstable woman who is lashing out at her loving parents. By the time we are done with you, the state will gladly hand Mia over to us for her own protection. Brittany stood in my kitchen watching the phone with a smug, satisfied smile returning to her face. She loved seeing our mother put me in my place. Devon looked slightly relieved, thinking this threat would finally force me into submission. They truly believed that threatening my child would break me. They thought my maternal panic would override my logical brain. You are threatening to kidnap my daughter using the legal system to cover up a massive federal wire fraud operation, I clarified, wanting her exact words and intentions completely out in the open. I am doing what is best for this family, she replied coldly. You have until tomorrow morning to bring those documents to our house and hand them over to your father. If you do not, we file the emergency custody papers. Do not test me, Rebecca. The call disconnected abruptly, leaving a dead dial tone echoing softly in the quiet room. I looked at Devon and Brittany. You heard her? Brittany said, crossing her arms. Drop this or lose your kid. They turned and walked out of my apartment. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind them, leaving me standing alone in the quiet kitchen. I turned the deadbolt, sliding the metal chain into place. My hands were shaking. I took a deep breath and tried to steady my racing heart. They had actually threatened to take my daughter. I spent 3 hours pacing the floor while Mia watched cartoons in the living room, completely unaware of the storm brewing around us. I kept replaying my mother's harsh voice in my head. Just as I convinced myself they were only bluffing, a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. I froze in the hallway. I checked the peephole, expecting to see Devon or Brittany returning. Instead, I saw a stranger in a plain gray suit holding a thick envelope. I opened the door just a few inches, keeping my foot wedged firmly against the baseboard. "Are you Rebecca?" he asked in a monotone voice, holding out a clipboard. "Yes, I am," I replied cautiously. He thrust the envelope through the narrow opening and handed me a pen. "You have been formally served," he stated blankly. "Please sign here to acknowledge receipt." My stomach dropped as I scribbled my name on his clipboard. He walked down the hallway without another word. I closed the door slowly and stared down at the heavy envelope resting in my hands. The return address belonged to one of the most ruthless and expensive family law firms in the entire city. My parents had not wasted a single minute. I tore the thick paper open and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. Printed right across the very top page in bold black ink were the terrifying words, "Emergency petition for temporary custody." I leaned against the front door and slid slowly down to the floor until I was sitting on the cold hardwood. My eyes darted rapidly across the dense legal jargon. They had filed an emergency injunction, claiming I was suffering from severe psychological distress and complete financial ruin. They attached completely fabricated statements from Devon claiming I was erratic and highly dangerous. They even had the audacity to request supervised visitation rights for me while they assumed full guardianship of Mia. The sheer terror hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The room started to spin slightly. My parents were extremely wealthy and highly connected. They regularly golfed with local politicians and had powerful judges sitting on their speed dial. The justice system is terrifyingly vulnerable to people with endless financial resources. I knew firsthand how easily a vicious lawyer could twist a demanding career into a false narrative of severe child neglect. They were actively weaponizing the legal system to silence me about their federal fraud. They figured the absolute panic of losing my child would force me to instantly surrender those loan documents and beg for their mercy. For about 5 agonizing minutes, I just sat there on the floor, paralyzed by the terrifying thought of my daughter being ripped away from me and placed into that incredibly toxic environment. I looked over into the bright living room. Mia was sitting on the soft carpet building a massive castle out of colorful plastic blocks. She placed a tiny flag on top of her tower and clapped her little hands together, beaming with pure, innocent pride. Looking at her sweet face, something inside me fundamentally shifted. The paralyzing fear instantly evaporated and was rapidly replaced by an icy, focused rage. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They attacked the one thing I loved more than life itself, but they forgot exactly who they were dealing with. The terrified single mother completely vanished. The cold, calculating forensic accountant immediately took over my brain. I stood up from the floor and tossed the custody petition onto the kitchen counter. This was not a real family court battle. This was a highly aggressive intimidation tactic designed to distract me from the real crime at hand. My father was terrified of federal prison, and my mother was terrified of losing her country club status. They were bleeding cash and utterly desperate to maintain control. I walked straight into my home office and locked the heavy wooden door securely behind me. I sat down at my desk and powered on my encrypted workstation. If they wanted to play a high-stakes game of legal warfare, I was going to utterly destroy their entire foundation. They were relying on dirty local lawyers, but I was dealing with severe federal crimes. A custody petition means absolutely nothing when the wealthy petitioners are sitting in a federal penitentiary facing decades behind iron bars. I cracked my knuckles and opened my secure auditing software. It was time to stop defending myself and start dismantling their entire fraud operation. My home office was suddenly too small for the massive web of lies I was about to untangle. I grabbed my laptop, a massive stack of blank printer paper, and 3 separate boxes of red push pins, and relocated straight into the center of the living room. I pushed my coffee table out of the way and dragged a large corkboard out of the hallway closet, leaning it against the wall right next to Mia's play area. This was no longer just an apartment, it was a forensic war room. I booted up my specialized tracing software and began pulling every single public record associated with Thomas's luxury car dealership. I bypassed the standard search engines and dug directly into state corporate registries, tax liens, and property deeds. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I downloaded years of financial filings. When you know exactly what you are looking for, corporate fraud is incredibly easy to spot. People like my father always think they are brilliant masterminds, but they always leave a digital trail of breadcrumbs. I printed out the initial wire transfers. I had already found the ones showing the Small Business Administration loan being funneled directly into Devon's offshore checking account. I pinned them to the center of the corkboard, but I needed to know the final destination of that money. Devon was arrogant, but he was not stupid enough to just leave $200,000 sitting in a single account, waiting to be audited by the IRS. I ran a deep background check on Devon's recent financial movements using a secure professional database. It took less than 45 minutes for the first major red flag to pop up on my screen. Exactly 3 days after the federal funds hit his offshore account, Devon authorized a massive wire transfer for $180,000. But he did not send it to the dealership to cover payroll or inventory like they claimed. He sent it to a newly formed limited liability company called Blue Horizon Investments. I wrote the name of the LLC on a thick index card and pinned it right next to Devon's bank statement, connecting them with a piece of red string. I then opened the state business registry to look up the founding documents for Blue Horizon Investments. I needed to see who the registered agent was. As the PDF loaded on my screen, my eyes narrowed. The company was registered to a small, discreet post office box in a wealthy suburb just 20 minutes away. But the listed managing director was not Thomas, and it was not Devon. The sole managing director of Blue Horizon Investments was Brittany. I leaned back on the carpet and stared at the glowing monitor in absolute disbelief. The sheer audacity of their lie was staggering. Brittany had stood in my kitchen just hours ago, crying fake tears and playing the victim. She had aggressively shamed me for supposedly bankrupting our father and destroying the family business. She had screamed that the loan was meant to save the dealership from going under. But the dealership was never the actual priority. The entire business was just a decaying front. The $200,000 of stolen government relief money was actually seed money. They had used my pristine credit score and my stolen Social Security number to illegally fund a shell company exclusively owned by my spoiled older sister. I did not stop there. I needed to know exactly what Blue Horizon Investments was doing with that stolen federal cash. I cross-referenced the LLC against county property records. The search results instantly populated with 3 separate hits. Brittany had used the stolen money as a massive cash down payment on a luxury vacation condo right on the waterfront. She was not just passively receiving stolen funds, she was actively laundering federal money through high-end real estate purchases. The sick, twisted reality of the situation finally washed over me. My parents were so deeply obsessed with maintaining Brittany's image as the perfect, wealthy, golden child that they were willing to commit federal identity theft to fund her lavish lifestyle. And when the money ran out, they decided to sacrifice my entire future to keep her afloat. They were fully prepared to steal my 6-year-old daughter and throw me into a vicious family court battle just to distract me from the fact that Brittany was buying oceanfront property with my stolen identity. I felt a cold, sharp smile spread across my face. They thought they had backed me into a corner with that custody petition. They thought they had outsmarted me. But they had just handed a licensed forensic accountant the exact blueprint to their entire criminal enterprise. I grabbed a black marker and drew a massive circle around Brittany's name on the printed property deed. The golden child of our family was about to take a very hard fall. I dropped the black marker onto the desk and picked up my cell phone. The time for gathering evidence on my own was officially over. I needed federal jurisdiction to lock this down before my parents could push their emergency custody petition through the local courts. I scrolled past the numerous threatening text messages from my mother and dialed a highly secure number I knew by heart. It belonged to Special Agent Davis at the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Over the past 5 years, I had served as an expert witness for his federal division tracing complex corporate fraud across international borders. We had a deep professional mutual respect. He answered on the second ring. "Rebecca," he said, his voice sharp and professional. "It is late on a Saturday. Tell me you have a massive case for me, and you are not just calling to chat." I let out a heavy breath, keeping my eyes fixed on the corkboard. "I have a massive case," I replied quietly, "but this one is strictly personal. It involves my father, Thomas, and a $200,000 small business administration loan fraud." There was a brief pause on the line. The clicking of a keyboard echoed faintly in the background. "Are you telling me your own father committed federal wire fraud using government relief funds?" he asked carefully. "Yes," I stated firmly. "And he did not just commit wire fraud, he committed severe identity theft. He forged my signature and used my social security number to secure the capital. Then he funneled the cash through an offshore account managed by his sales director, Devin, before washing it through a domestic shell company to purchase high-end waterfront real estate for my sister Brittany." Agent Davis let out a low whistle. "That is a textbook money laundering operation. Do you have the paper trail to back this up?" I smiled coldly, staring at the intricate web of red string pinned to my living room wall. "I have every single bank statement, wire transfer log, and property deed fully documented and digitally encrypted. I am sending you the secure access keys to my private server right now." I tapped a few keys on my laptop, executing the legal data transfer. As the progress bar filled my mind, briefly flashed back to my 18th birthday. That was the exact day I learned my family viewed me entirely as a disposable financial asset. While other teenagers were celebrating their transition into adulthood, I was sitting in a local bank branch staring at a severely defaulted credit report. My parents had secretly opened 4 different high-limit credit cards using my social security number when I was just 16 years old. They maxed them out to pay for Brittany to take a lavish European graduation trip and then simply stopped making the payments. When I confronted them, my father had coldly told me that it was the absolute least I could do to repay them for raising me. I spent the next 7 years of my young adult life working grueling double shifts repairing my completely ruined credit score while simultaneously paying my own way through college. That agonizing experience is exactly what drove me to become a forensic accountant in the first place. I promised myself I would never let anyone exploit my financial identity ever again. And now, 15 years later, they had the absolute audacity to try the exact same tactic. But this time, they were not stealing a few $1,000s for a European vacation. They were stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from the federal government to buy luxury real estate. The file transfer completed with a soft chime from my computer speakers. Agent Davis spoke up, breaking the silence. "I have received the files, Rebecca. I am opening the primary ledger right now." I listened to him click through the digital folders. He went silent for 3 full minutes. The only sound was his rapid breathing as he processed the sheer scale of the financial crimes sitting right in front of him. "You were not exaggerating," he finally said, his tone completely shifting from casual professional to dead serious. "The offshore routing numbers you flagged belong to a known tax haven. If your father falsified the initial government loan applications to obtain these funds, we are looking at a minimum of 20 years in federal prison for every single person involved in this domestic laundering chain. That includes your father, your sister, and her husband." "I know the sentencing guidelines," I replied evenly. "They also just served me with an emergency custody petition, claiming I am an unfit mother to blackmail me into silence. Extortion and witness tampering," he muttered angrily, reading my notes. This ends entirely right now, Rebecca. I appreciate that, Davis, I replied, leaning closer to the glowing screen of my laptop. But I do not just want a standard raid based on digital paper trails. They are wealthy, and they have dirty lawyers who will try to tie this up in court for years claiming I manipulated the data. I want them caught completely red-handed. I need them to confess to the forgery and the extortion on tape. Davis let out a heavy sigh, but I could hear the grudging respect in his voice. You want to wear a wire? He asked. I do, I confirmed without a second of hesitation. They want me to sign over my accounting firm to Brittany to cover the fake debt. They have summoned me to their annual country club Christmas party to sign the extortion papers in front of their sleazy family attorney. It is the perfect setup. I will get them all in one room and I will make them admit to the loan fraud on federal tape. Davis agreed to fast-track the authorization, and we ended the call. I placed my phone back on the desk and turned my attention back to the massive corkboard in my living room. I needed to build a completely airtight financial timeline before I walked into that lion den. I started mapping out the exact sequence of events connecting the dates of the forged signature to the initial wire transfers. But as I traced the flow of the stolen $200,000, a glaring mathematical discrepancy suddenly caught my eye. The federal loan was for exactly $200,000. The funds were wired in 4 equal installments of $50,000 into Devon offshore checking account. However, the subsequent wire transfer from Devon to Brittany Shell Company, Blue Horizon Investments, was only for $180,000. There was exactly $20,000 completely unaccounted for in the ledger. I sat down cross-legged on the carpet and began running a microanalysis on Devon personal banking history during that specific 2-week window. Devon was incredibly arrogant, but he was also fundamentally greedy. It did not take long for me to find the missing money. Devon had not just acted as a passive middleman for my father's illegal operation, he had actively skimmed right off the top of the fraudulent funds. He had diverted the missing $20,000 into a separate hidden cryptocurrency wallet registered exclusively under his own name. I cross-referenced the digital wallet address with his recent credit card statements. He had used that stolen $20,000 to buy himself a custom Rolex watch and fund a lavish weekend trip to Las Vegas that he had claimed was a dealership networking event. My father and my sister had absolutely no idea that Devon was stealing from them. Thomas thought Devon was his loyal, obedient soldier helping him save the failing dealership. Brittany thought she had a devoted husband who was securing her luxury real estate empire. Neither of them knew he was secretly skimming their stolen government cash to fund his own private luxury lifestyle. A slow, calculated smile crept across my face. This was the ultimate leverage. My family was built entirely on a foundation of fake loyalty and shared greed. If I just handed the files to the FBI, they would all hire expensive defense attorneys and present a united front claiming I framed them. But if I exposed Devon's secret theft right in front of Thomas and Brittany, their united front would instantly shatter into a million pieces. They would immediately turn on each other like starving wolves. Devon would throw Thomas under the bus to save himself from the wrath of my father, and Thomas would happily sacrifice Devon to the federal agents to protect his own skin. I grabbed a bright yellow marker and drew a thick line connecting Devon's offshore account directly to the hidden crypto wallet. I wrote the word theft in bold capital letters, right in the middle of the board. The emergency custody petition sitting on my kitchen counter no longer scared me. It was nothing but a desperate bluff from a family that was already rotting from the inside out. They thought they were dragging a terrified, helpless mother into a legal slaughterhouse. They did not realize I had just meticulously mapped out their absolute ruin. I spent the next 3 hours printing every single piece of evidence and organizing it into a very thick black binder. I aligned the bank statements, the forged loan application, the property deeds, and the hidden crypto wallet receipts in perfect chronological order. I closed the heavy binder. The trap was fully constructed. Now I just had to play my new part perfectly. I took a deep breath and closed my laptop. It was time to put on the performance of a lifetime. I cleared my throat a few times, making sure my voice sounded suitably raw and exhausted. I needed my father to believe that the emergency custody petition had completely broken my spirit. I picked up my cell phone from the desk and dialed his personal number. I let my hand shake slightly just to physically put myself in the mindset of a terrified mother. The phone rang 3 times before he finally picked up. He did not say hello. He simply breathed heavily into the receiver, waiting for me to speak first. It was a classic intimidation tactic he had used on his car dealership employees for decades. I forced a wet, desperate sob into my throat before I spoke. "Dad, please," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly on the last syllable. A loud, smug sigh echoed through the phone. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice dripping with absolute arrogance. "I see the process server finally made it to your little apartment. Are you ready to stop throwing your ridiculous tantrums and start acting like a respectful member of this family, Rebecca?" I gripped the edge of my desk, fighting the overwhelming urge to scream the truth at him. Instead, I squeezed my eyes shut and forced another fake sob out of my lungs. "You cannot take Mia away from me," I pleaded loudly, my voice trembling with manufactured panic. "Please, Dad, I am begging you. Do not do this to her. Do not do this to me. She is my little girl." I heard the ice clinking in a glass on his end of the line. He was probably sitting in his massive leather recliner, sipping expensive bourbon bought with stolen federal funds. "You brought this entirely on yourself," he stated coldly. "You walked out of Thanksgiving dinner and disrespected your mother. You threatened your sister and her husband. You left me with absolutely no choice. You are clearly unstable, and we have to protect our granddaughter from your erratic behavior." I let out a ragged breath, making sure it was loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "Okay, I surrender," I cried out, making my voice sound completely defeated. "You win, Dad. You win. Just please drop the custody petition. Tell Mom not to call Child Protective Services. I will do whatever you want. I will take the blame for the loan." A heavy silence fell over the line. I knew I had him hooked. The sheer narcissism of a man like my father could never resist total, absolute submission. "What exactly are you offering, Rebecca?" he asked, his tone suddenly dropping an octave, becoming strictly business. I will confess to taking the $200,000 Small Business Administration loan I offered, my voice shaking violently. "I will tell anyone who asks that I applied for it and that I forged your signature as a co-signer because my accounting firm was failing. I will take the entire debt under my own name, and I will pay back every single penny to the government. Just please drop the lawsuit and leave my daughter alone." I listened closely as he processed the offer. It was exactly what he wanted. He wanted a complete legal shield. If the IRS ever came knocking, he could just point his finger at his pathetic, financially ruined daughter and claim he was a victim of my fraud. It was a coward move, but Thomas was the ultimate coward. He chuckled softly, a dark, menacing sound that made my skin crawl. "That is very generous of you, Rebecca," he replied smoothly. "But your word means absolutely nothing to me anymore. You have proven that you are highly unpredictable. If you really want me to call off my high-priced lawyers, you are going to put that confession in writing. I want a legally binding document, drafted by my attorney, stating that you accept full financial and legal responsibility for that specific federal loan." I sniffled loudly and wiped a fake tear from my cheek. "I will sign whatever you want, Dad," I whimpered softly. "Just promise me you will tear up those custody papers the second I sign." "I promise," he lied smoothly. I could hear the sheer triumph radiating from his voice. He honestly thought he had just executed the greatest financial manipulation of his entire life. He thought he had successfully forced his youngest daughter to take the fall for his massive federal crimes just by threatening to steal her child. He was absolutely drunk on his own perceived power. But he had no idea he was playing directly into the hands of a federal investigator. The trap was springing shut. I took a deep breath, keeping up the facade of a broken woman. "But Dad," I stammered, acting as though the mere thought of taking on that massive debt was physically crushing me. $200,000 is a huge amount of money. It will take me years to pay that off. I am a single mother. You have to give me some kind of grace period. A harsh scoff echoed through the phone line. Grace period? He mocked bitterly. You lost the right to ask for grace the second you walked out of my house and threatened my family, Rebecca. You are lucky I am even giving you this option. But since you mentioned your precarious financial situation, I think we need to establish some collateral. I frowned, genuinely confused for a split second before my forensic mind caught up to his twisted logic. Collateral? I asked weakly. What do you mean, collateral? You are already making me sign a confession. I mean that I do not trust you. He snapped, his voice hardening. You are sneaky, Rebecca. You have always been sneaky. You could sign that paper today and then turn around and file for bankruptcy tomorrow just to spite us. We need a guarantee that you are going to bleed for this money. I want 51% of your accounting firm. The sheer audacity of his demand actually made me blink in genuine surprise. He was not just trying to force me to take the fall for his federal crimes. He was actively trying to steal the highly successful business I had built entirely from scratch. You want my company, I whispered, letting genuine shock bleed into my voice. I want a controlling interest in your company, he corrected smoothly. We will transfer 51% of your business shares directly into Brittany's name. She will be the majority owner. If you default on a single payment for that loan, she will liquidate your entire client list and sell your assets to cover the debt. It is the only way I can guarantee you will not try to screw us over. My mind raced analyzing the incredible legal implications of what he was demanding. He wanted me to legally transfer a controlling stake of my forensic accounting firm to the exact same shell company director who was currently laundering stolen federal funds. It was a spectacular level of corporate suicide. I could hear my mother Barbara whispering something in the background. Thomas cleared his throat. And there is one more thing, he added, his tone dripping with absolute authority. You are not just going to sign this paperwork in some dark alley. We are going to do this the right way. Our family lawyer Richard will have all the documents drafted by Friday. You will bring yourself to the annual country club Christmas party on Saturday night. We have reserved the private study overlooking the main ballroom. You will walk in there, look Richard directly in the eye, and sign every single page in front of witnesses. The country club Christmas party. It was the absolute pinnacle of my parents' social calendar. It was a massive, glittering event where the wealthiest families in the city gathered to drink expensive champagne and show off their custom-tailored outfits. My parents loved parading around that ballroom acting like they were local royalty. Forcing me to sign away my company and confess to a felony in the middle of their favorite high society event was the ultimate power trip. They wanted to crush my spirit while simultaneously sipping martinis with their rich friends. Okay? I whimpered, forcing my voice to break into a quiet, pathetic sob. Okay, Dad. I will be there. I will sign the papers. Just please call off the lawyers. I will tell Richard to hold the custody petition until Sunday morning, Thomas replied coldly. If you show up and sign the papers, I will have him shred it. If you try anything funny, or if you try to run, I will have the police at your door by noon. We will see you on Saturday night, Rebecca. Do not be late. He hung up the phone without another word. The line went dead, leaving a heavy silence in my living room. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. I did not cry. I did not panic. I stood up from my desk and walked back over to the massive corkboard covered in red string and printed bank statements. I reached out and traced the line connecting Devon's hidden crypto wallet to the stolen loan funds. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to break me in front of their corrupt lawyer at their fancy country club party. They thought they had backed a desperate mother into a corner. They had absolutely no idea they had just personally invited a federal informant into the very heart of their criminal operation. I picked up a red marker and circled the date on my wall calendar. Saturday night was going to be a Christmas party they would never, ever forget. Saturday morning arrived with a bitter winter chill that frosted the windows of my apartment. I woke up early and packed a small overnight bag for Mia. I had arranged for her to stay the entire weekend with Diana, my senior accounting partner, and one of the only people in this world I trusted implicitly. Diana lived in a secure, gated community 40 minutes in the opposite direction of my parents' country club. When I dropped Mia off, I hugged her tightly against my chest, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. I told her I had a boring work meeting and that Diana was going to make homemade pizzas for dinner. Mia smiled brightly and ran inside without a care in the world. Knowing she was completely safe and entirely unreachable by my mother gave me the mental clarity I needed for what was about to happen next. I drove straight from the house to a nondescript brutalist government building located right in the bustling heart of downtown. I parked my car in the secure underground garage and took the private elevator directly to the 7th floor. Special Agent Davis was waiting for me in a sterile, windowless conference room. He was a tall, imposing man with graying hair and sharp, observant eyes. He had two other federal agents with him, a tech specialist and a field operative who would be coordinating the upcoming raid. They did not waste any time with pleasantries. The tech specialist asked me to stand up and remove my thick winter coat. She produced a tiny black microphone no larger than a standard shirt button and a flat rectangular transmitter pack. I lifted my blouse, and she carefully taped the cold metal transmitter securely against the small of my back using surgical-grade adhesive. She then ran a micro-thin wire up my spine and pinned the microscopic microphone discreetly under the collar of my silk dress shirt. It felt surprisingly heavy against my skin, a constant physical reminder of the incredible danger I was about to walk into. The cold metal sent a slight shiver down my spine. Agent Davis leaned against the metal table, crossing his arms over his broad chest. He looked at me with a deeply serious expression. "I need you to fully understand the gravity of this situation, Rebecca," he warned, his voice echoing slightly in the bare room. "You are not just dealing with greedy family members anymore. You are walking into a confined space with cornered, desperate people. Financial crimes of this magnitude carry severe mandatory minimum sentences. When people who have lived their entire lives wrapped in luxury suddenly realize they are about to lose everything and go to federal prison, they become incredibly unpredictable and highly dangerous." I adjusted the collar of my shirt, making sure the wire was completely invisible in the reflection of the glass window. "I know my family, Agent Davis," I replied calmly. "They are cowards. They rely entirely on intimidation and expensive lawyers to do their dirty work. They will not get violent in a public country club. They care far too much about their precious social reputation to make a physical scene." Davis shook his head slowly, clearly not comforted by my assessment. "You do not know how Devin is going to react when you push him into a corner," he countered firmly. "We ran a deeper background check on him this morning based on your files. He has a history of severe gambling debts and aggressive altercations that Thomas quietly paid to make go away. If Devin figures out you are wearing a federal wire before my team breaches that door, you are going to be in immediate physical danger. Do you understand the safe word protocol?" I nodded, tapping the side of my leg. "Yes, I understand. If I feel threatened, or if I get the confession, I just send a single period as a text message to the designated burner number. Your tactical team will be stationed in the adjoining catering kitchen and will breach the private study within 10 seconds. Exactly," Davis confirmed, standing up straight. 10 seconds is a very long time if things go south in a locked room. Keep your distance from Devin. Do not let him stand between you and the exit door. Let them do the talking. Guide the conversation toward the Small Business Administration loan and the forged signature, but do not push too aggressively. Let their own massive arrogance dig their graves." I thanked the tech specialist and put my heavy winter coat back on, concealing the federal equipment perfectly. I walked out of the government building and back into the freezing winter air. My heart was pounding a steady, rhythmic beat against my ribs, but my mind was completely focused on the mission. I climbed into my car and turned the heater on high. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the city skyline. It was finally time. I put the car in drive and headed straight toward the opulent country club where my parents were waiting to destroy my life. I pulled my car up to the massive iron gates of the Oak Ridge Country Club. The entire estate was glowing under the dark winter sky. Thousands of warm, white Christmas lights were meticulously wrapped around every single oak tree lining the long, sweeping driveway. Expensive European luxury cars were stacked in the valet circle. The sheer opulence of the place was nauseating, especially knowing that my family lavish lifestyle was currently being subsidized by stolen federal relief funds. I handed my keys to the valet, taking a slow, deep breath as the frigid air hit my face. The wire taped to my lower back felt cold and heavy against my skin. I smoothed down the front of my silk dress shirt, ensuring the microscopic microphone hidden under my collar was completely secure. I walked up the wide marble steps and pushed open the heavy brass doors entering the grand lobby. The main ballroom was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across the polished dance floor. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of champagne and expensive caviar. A string quartet played a lively holiday arrangement in the corner. It was a perfect picture of high society elegance, hiding a massive rotting core of fraud. I had barely taken 3 steps into the room when my mother Barbara spotted me. She was wearing a stunning floor-length emerald green gown dripping in diamonds that I suspected were heavily leveraged. She broke away from a group of wealthy socialites and marched directly toward me, her high heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. She grabbed my upper arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging painfully into my skin. "You are late," she hissed, her voice low and furious. "Your father has been pacing the study for 20 minutes. Richard is already billing us for his time." I pulled my arm out of her grip, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "I hit traffic, Mom," I replied softly, playing the role of the defeated daughter. I am here now. Let us just get this over with so I can go home." Her eyes narrowed, taking in my simple, understated black dress. She clearly disapproved of my lack of glamorous effort, but she quickly plastered a wide, fake smile across her face as 2 older women approached us from the bar. These were women my mother played tennis with, women she desperately needed to impress. "Oh, Margaret Helen," she called out, her voice suddenly pitching up an octave to sound sickly sweet. "Look who finally decided to join us. It is my youngest Rebecca." Margaret, an older woman dripping in expensive pearls, looked me up and down with barely concealed pity. "Oh, hello, Rebecca," she said slowly as if speaking to a fragile child. "We were just telling your mother how incredibly generous your family is being. It must be such a massive relief to have a father willing to bail you out of such a terrible financial mess." I forced a small, tight smile, completely ignoring the burning rage rising in my chest. Helen chimed in, shaking her head sympathetically. "Running a business is just too stressful for a single mother, dear. You should not feel bad about failing. It happens to the best of us. And now that Brittany is taking over majority control of your little firm, I am sure everything will run much more smoothly. Your sister just has such a brilliant head for business." The absolute audacity of the lie was breathtaking. My mother had not just spread rumors about my supposed bankruptcy, she had actively campaigned to brand me as a total failure to the entire country club elite. She was using my complete character assassination as a social stepping stone to elevate her golden child. She was openly bragging about stealing 51% of my successful forensic accounting firm, framing it as an act of maternal charity. "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "It is truly amazing what my sister is capable of doing with money. I am sure she will manage the firm exactly how she manages everything else in her life." My mother shot me a vicious warning glare, clearly catching the subtle sarcasm in my tone, but the 2 socialites remained completely oblivious. "Well," Barbara said, tightly grabbing my arm again, "we must be going. Thomas is waiting upstairs to finalize the paperwork. We are just so glad we can keep this little mess entirely in the family." She dragged me away from the crowd, practically marching me toward the grand, sweeping staircase leading up to the private VIP rooms. The music faded slightly as we climbed the carpeted stairs. This was it. I was walking straight into the lion den surrounded by people who wanted to strip me down to nothing. But they had absolutely no idea that I was not the prey. I was the federal trap. The heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open, revealing a dimly lit hallway lined with expensive oil paintings. As my mother pushed me forward, the vibrant sounds of the string quartet and the clinking champagne glasses from the main ballroom instantly vanished. The thick Persian runners absorbed our footsteps completely. We stopped in front of a solid mahogany door at the very end of the corridor. It was the executive VIP study, a room designed specifically for high-level private negotiations and discreet country club deals. My mother turned the brass handle and shoved me inside before stepping in and firmly locking the door behind us. The heavy click of the deadbolt echoed loudly in the sudden oppressive silence. The room smelled strongly of aged scotch and expensive leather. A massive dark wood conference table dominated the center of the space. My father Thomas was sitting at the head of the table swirling an amber liquid in a crystal glass. He looked incredibly smug wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo that I knew was paid for with fraudulent funds. Sitting to his right was Richard. Richard was a slick, fast-talking lawyer who specialized in making wealthy people's problems quietly disappear. Across from them sat Brittany and Devon. Brittany was scrolling through her phone looking completely bored, while Devon leaned far back in his heavy leather chair, staring at me with a predatory grin. "Welcome to the adults' table, Rebecca," my father said, his voice dripping with pure condescension. "Have a seat. We have a lot of paperwork to get through, and I want to be back downstairs before they serve the main course." I walked slowly toward the empty chair positioned at the opposite end of the massive table. I kept my posture slightly hunched, playing the part of the defeated and terrified daughter. As I sat down, I could feel the cold metal of the federal transmitter pressing reassuringly against my lower spine. Richard cleared his throat and opened his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy ivory paper. He did not bother with any polite greetings or legal disclaimers. He simply slid the massive contract aggressively across the polished mahogany wood until it bumped against my hands. "This is the transfer agreement and the formal debt acknowledgement," Richard stated in a bored, monotone voice. "It legally transfers 51% of the voting shares and ownership rights of your accounting firm directly to your sister Brittany. The second section is a binding affidavit stating that you accept sole and complete financial responsibility for the $200,000 Small Business Administration loan currently under investigation. You will waive all rights to appeal or contest this debt in any future court proceedings." I stared down at the documents, letting my hands tremble visibly. "You want me to just sign away my entire life work without even reading the fine print?" I asked, my voice wavering perfectly. Devon let out a loud, harsh bark of laughter. He leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the table. "You do not need to read anything, Becky," he sneered. "You just need to pick up the pen and do exactly what you are told. You are way out of your league here. You thought you could throw a tantrum at Thanksgiving and actually threaten us. You thought you were playing chess, but you are just a small-time bookkeeper who got completely outsmarted by real sharks. We own you now." Brittany finally looked up from her phone, rolling her eyes in annoyance. "Seriously? Rebecca just signed the stupid papers," she whined. "I have friends waiting for me at the bar. You are the one who messed up your business finances in the first place. Dad is actually doing you a massive favor by letting me take over management. You should be thanking us for keeping you out of bankruptcy court." I looked at my sister, feeling a wave of absolute disgust. She was so deeply insulated by my parents' lies that she actually believed she was the hero of this story. She had no idea she was the registered agent for a money laundering shell company. I looked back down at the contract. The words blurred slightly under the dim overhead lights. My mother stepped away from the locked door and walked up right behind my chair. She placed both of her hands heavily on my shoulders, pressing down hard to physically trap me in the seat. "No more drama, Rebecca," she whispered harshly right into my ear. "You pick up that pen right now, and you sign every single page. If you hesitate for even 1 second, Richard makes a phone call and the emergency custody papers are filed instantly. I stared down at the heavy ivory paper. The gold fountain pen was lying right next to the signature line. My mother dug her manicured fingernails deeper into my shoulders. Her expensive perfume was thick and suffocating in the enclosed room. I reached out slowly and picked up the heavy gold pen. I let the metal tip hover just an inch above the crisp paper. I took a shallow breath, ensuring the microphone under my collar caught every nuance of the conversation. I just need to be absolutely clear on what I am agreeing to, I said, making my voice sound small and defeated. I looked right across the table at my father. Thomas took another slow sip of his bourbon, looking thoroughly entertained by my misery. So if I sign this contract giving Brittany 51% of my accounting firm, you will admit that you forged my name on the Small Business Administration loan, Dad, I asked clearly. I need to know that you are taking responsibility for the forgery before I take on the debt. Thomas rolled his eyes and set his crystal glass down on the mahogany table with a loud thud. Good grief, Rebecca, he sighed in heavy annoyance. Yes, I signed your name on the relief applications. You were not using your pristine credit score for anything important anyway. The dealership needed liquid cash immediately, and the federal government was just handing out $200,000 checks to anyone with a pulse and a good financial record. I did what I had to do to protect the family empire. So you admit you committed identity theft to defraud a federal agency? I pressed gently, keeping my tone completely submissive so he would not realize he was being interrogated. Richard, the slick family lawyer, shifted slightly in his leather chair. Thomas, do not use those specific legal terms, Richard warned quietly. But my father was far too arrogant to listen to legal counsel from a man he paid by the hour. Oh, shut up, Richard, Thomas snapped, waving a dismissive hand. It is not identity theft if it stays in the family. She is my daughter. I own her credit. My mother Barbara leaned down so her face was right next to mine. Her voice was pure venom. We gave you life, Rebecca, she hissed angrily. We fed you and clothed you and paid for your existence. You owed us that credit score. You owe us this business. Now stop stalling and sign the damn paper before I call the judge myself and have Mia taken away from you tonight. I let the pen hover a little longer. The federal tape now had clear, undeniable audio of identity theft, wire fraud, and extortion involving a minor child. But I needed one more piece of the puzzle. I needed Devin to fully implicate himself in the money laundering operation. I shifted my gaze toward Devin, who was still lounging confidently in his heavy leather chair. But what about the money? I asked, looking at the tall African-American sales director. Dad, you said the dealership needed the cash, but the federal funds were wired directly into Devon offshore accounts. How am I supposed to explain that to the Internal Revenue Service if they audit my firm? Devon let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and gave me a predatory grin. You really are just a naive little bean counter, Becky, he boasted loudly. You do not explain anything to the IRS. You just cook the books and keep your mouth shut like a good girl. The dealership is completely untouchable. I moved that 200 grand through my offshore account so smoothly, the government will never even see a ripple. I washed it right through Brittany Real Estate Holding Company before anyone could even blink. Brittany looked up from her phone and smiled proudly at her husband. Devin is a financial genius, she chimed in, completely oblivious to the fact that she was currently confessing to felony money laundering on a federal wire. He secured my luxury condo with that cash and no one suspects a thing. We are completely protected, so do us all a massive favor and sign the contract so we can go back downstairs and enjoy our expensive champagne. I looked around the room, taking in their smug, satisfied faces. My father, the mastermind. My mother, the extortionist. Devin, the arrogant launderer. They had absolutely no idea that every single word they just proudly declared had been beamed directly to a highly secure federal server. They had just meticulously confessed to multiple major federal crimes in front of a licensed forensic accountant wearing a government transmitter. I let the heavy gold pen rest between my fingers, feeling the smooth, cool metal against my skin. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint ticking of the antique grandfather clock standing in the corner. I looked around the mahogany table, taking one final mental photograph of my family in their element. I looked at my mother, who was still hovering behind me, her face twisted into a mask of bitter impatience. I looked at Brittany, who was already staring back down at her phone, completely unbothered by the fact that she was stealing my livelihood. I looked at Devin, who was swirling his drink with a sickeningly arrogant smirk plastered across his face. And finally, I looked directly at my father Thomas. He was sitting at the head of the table, radiating absolute power and control. He truly believed he had won. He believed he had successfully crushed his youngest daughter into complete submission. I slowly lowered the gold pen until the ink tip rested right above the signature line on the heavy ivory paper. My mother let out a small sigh of relief, her grip on my shoulders relaxing just a fraction. But I did not press down. Instead of signing my name, I smoothly dropped the pen onto the table. It landed with a sharp metallic clatter that echoed loudly in the silent study. My mother gasped, pulling her hands away from my shoulders, as if she had been burned. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp and panicky. "Richard," the lawyer leaned forward, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Rebecca, you need to sign the document," Richard instructed, pointing a finger at the paper. I ignored him completely. I reached into the small side pocket of my black dress and pulled out my cell phone. The screen illuminated the dim room, casting a cold blue glow across my face. Devin sat up straight in his heavy leather chair, his arrogant smirk instantly vanishing. "Put the phone away, Becky," he ordered, his voice suddenly tight with suspicion. "What are you playing at?" I did not look at him. I kept my eyes locked onto my father as I unlocked the screen and opened my text messages. I navigated to the secure burner number Agent Davis had programmed into my contacts just hours earlier. My thumb hovered over the digital keyboard for a split second. This was the point of no return. Once I sent this message, my family as I knew it would cease to exist. They would be utterly destroyed by their own greed. I pressed the period key once, typing a single dot, then I pressed send. I placed the phone face down on the contract right over the blank signature line. "What the hell was that?" Thomas barked, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "Who are you texting right now? You are supposed to be signing the contract." I pushed my chair back slowly and stood up. The heavy wooden legs scraped loudly against the carpet. I took a deep breath of the stale air, feeling a massive, crushing weight finally lift off my chest. I reached down and smoothed the wrinkles out of my black skirt before straightening my jacket. I stood tall, refusing to hunch my shoulders or play the victim for a single second longer. My father slammed his fist down on the table, rattling the crystal glasses. "I asked you a question, Rebecca," he roared, his voice echoing violently off the wood-paneled walls. "What are you doing?" I looked him dead in the eyes and let a cold, satisfied smile spread across my face. "I am balancing the books, Dad," I replied, my voice echoing with absolute authority. Brittany let out a loud, dramatic groan. "Oh my God, she is having a psychological breakdown," she whined loudly. "Mom, call the judge right now. Get her kid taken away so we can go home." But Thomas did not reach for his phone. He was staring at me, his eyes narrowing as his cunning mind desperately tried to process my sudden shift in demeanor. He noticed my perfect posture and the complete absence of fear in my eyes. He noticed that my hands were no longer shaking. Devin stood up, his massive frame towering over the table. "I am not playing these stupid games anymore, Becky," he threatened, taking a heavy step toward me. "You are going to pick up that pen and sign the paper right now, or I am going to make you regret ever walking into this room." I did not flinch or back away from his towering physical presence. I just kept smiling at him. "You are no longer in control," I stated to him very clearly and with absolute finality now. Devin raised his hand, curling his fingers into a tight fist. He took one more aggressive step toward me, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the plush carpet. He was fully prepared to use physical violence to force my compliance, but he never got the chance to close the distance between us. The 10-second protocol had just expired. A deafening crash suddenly shattered the tense silence of the private study. The heavy, solid mahogany doors were violently kicked open from the outside with such immense physical force that the brass deadbolt physically tore through the expensive wood frame. Splinters flew across the room, showering the Persian rug. Devon spun around, his fist still raised, but he instantly froze in absolute terror. This was not the country club security staff coming to check on a noise complaint. A highly coordinated team of armed federal agents flooded into the executive room. They were wearing dark tactical vests with the letters FBI and IRS printed across their chests in bright yellow text. They moved with terrifying speed and absolute precision. Two agents immediately flanked the doorway, securing the primary exit, while three more fanned out across the room with their hands resting firmly on their holstered weapons. "Stay exactly where you are, and keep your hands where we can see them." A loud, commanding voice echoed through the space. Special Agent Davis stepped through the splintered doorway, looking completely unrecognizable from the calm man I had spoken to in the windowless government building just hours ago. He was now operating in full tactical command. Through the shattered doorway, the luxurious atmosphere of the annual Christmas party instantly devolved into complete and utter chaos. The lively holiday music from the string quartet abruptly screeched to a halt as a cello was knocked over in the panic. Wealthy socialites who had just been sipping expensive champagne and gossiping about my supposed financial ruin were now screaming in sheer terror. I could see women in designer evening gowns dropping their crystal glasses and scrambling frantically toward the main ballroom exits. Men in custom tuxedos were being forcefully directed to back away from the grand staircase by additional federal operatives stationed on the ground floor. The pristine, high society bubble my parents had spent decades carefully cultivating was popping right in front of their eyes in the most humiliating public spectacle imaginable. Brittany let out a piercing, dramatic shriek and immediately dropped her phone onto the mahogany table. She threw her hands over her head and cowered in her heavy leather chair, completely terrified by the sudden presence of armed law enforcement. My mother, Barbara, was absolutely paralyzed. She stood frozen right behind my empty chair, her mouth hanging wide open in pure shock. Her emerald green gown suddenly looked completely ridiculous in the center of a federal raid. She stared at the tactical vests, as if her brain simply could not process the reality of what was happening. But my father Thomas did not cower. His sheer narcissism completely blinded him to the extreme danger he was currently facing. He genuinely believed that his vast wealth and local country club influence made him completely untouchable, even by the federal government. His face turned a dangerous shade of dark purple as he slammed both of his hands down on the conference table. "What is the meaning of this?" Thomas roared furiously, spittle flying from his lips. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Agent Davis. "Do you have any idea who I am? You have absolutely no jurisdiction to barge into a private club and disrupt my family business. I want every single one of your badge numbers right now. I am calling the governor, and I am going to sue this entire department into complete bankruptcy." Agent Davis did not even blink at the aggressive threat. He stood perfectly still in the center of the room, his expression entirely unreadable. Thomas turned his furious gaze toward his slick family lawyer. "Richard, do something," Thomas demanded loudly. "Throw these thugs out of my private study right now. Tell them they are trespassing on private property." But Richard was not a federal defense attorney. He was a cowardly country club lawyer who specialized in bullying local vendors and drafting predatory contracts. The moment the federal agents had breached the door, Richard had instinctively thrown his hands into the air and backed himself completely into the far corner of the room. He was pressing his body so hard against the expensive oil paintings, he looked like he was trying to melt directly into the wall. "I do not represent you in federal criminal matters, Thomas." Richard stammered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. I am just a corporate consultant. I am not involved in whatever this situation is happening now. Agent Davis did not even glance in the direction of the cowardly lawyer or my furious father. He ignored Thomas' screaming demands and the panicked cries echoing from the hallway. Instead, Davis walked right past the conference table and stopped directly in front of me. The federal agent relaxed his broad shoulders slightly and gave me a respectful nod. Did you get it, ma'am? He asked, his voice calm and steady amidst the chaos of the room. I reached under the hem of my black suit jacket and detached the transmitter pack from the small of my back. I pulled the microscopic wire loose from beneath the collar of my silk shirt and placed the recording apparatus into his waiting hand. I got every single word, Davis, I replied clearly. They admitted to the forged signature, the wire fraud, and the plan to launder the funds. They admitted to the custody extortion plot on the record. Excellent work, Rebecca Davis stated, slipping the device into an evidence pouch. We have the perimeter locked down. My father, Thomas, stopped yelling instantly. The purple color drained from his face, leaving him suddenly old. He stared at the evidence pouch in Davis' hand and then turned his horrified gaze toward me. His jaw moved up and down a few times, but no sound came out. Brittany finally uncurled herself from her leather chair. Her makeup was ruined by her tears. What is going on? She whimpered, looking frantically between me and the agents. Becky, what did you just give him? Why is he calling you ma'am? Devin was leaning heavily against the wall paneling, looking like he might vomit. He pointed a shaking finger at me. She is a rat, he gasped. She wore a wire. She brought the feds into our business. I turned to fully face my family. The victim they thought they had cornered was completely gone. I stood tall and squared my shoulders. I did not bring the feds into your business, Devin, I corrected. You brought the feds into my business when you decided to steal my identity to commit loan fraud. My mother, Barbara, finally found her voice. She took a hesitant step forward, her expensive emerald gown rustling loudly. Rebecca, what have you done? She cried out, clutching her diamond necklace. We are your family. You are just a small-time bookkeeper. You do not understand how these things work. The banks make mistakes all the time. We could have fixed this. You are going to ruin your own father over a simple misunderstanding. I let out a sharp laugh that cut through the heavy tension in the room. A simple misunderstanding, I echoed, shaking my head. Mom, you truly have absolutely no idea who I am or what I do for a living. You have spent the last decade telling all your country club friends that I am just a struggling single mother crunching numbers in a tiny office. You convinced yourselves that I was a financial failure because I refused to work at your corrupt dealership. Thomas grabbed the edge of the mahogany table to steady himself. He was finally starting to realize the catastrophic scale of his miscalculation. What are you talking about? He wheezed, his chest heaving under his expensive tuxedo. Who are you working for, Rebecca? I looked him dead in the eye, feeling a rush of absolute vindication. I am not a standard bookkeeper, Dad. I declared, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. I do not do personal taxes, and I do not balance petty cash drawers. I am a top-tier forensic investigator. My firm is exclusively contracted by the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I spend my entire life tracking down hidden offshore accounts, shell companies, and massive corporate fraud rings. I dismantle international money laundering operations for the federal government. The silence that followed my words was absolute. The sheer magnitude of my revelation hit them like a physical shockwave. Brittany let out a small, pathetic gasp and covered her mouth with both hands. Devin slid slowly down the wood-paneled wall until he was sitting on the floor, staring blankly at the expensive Persian rug. My father looked as though he had just been struck by lightning. He realized that his ultimate weapon had completely backfired. He had intentionally chosen to steal the financial identity of the single most dangerous person on earth for a fraudster to target. He had blindly invited a highly trained federal investigator directly into the center of his massive criminal enterprise. He had handed me the exact blueprints to his complete destruction, and I had used every single piece of that evidence to build a completely inescapable federal cage right around him and his entire corrupt empire. I reached into my leather tote bag sitting on the floor and pulled out the thick black binder I had assembled in my living room. I lifted it high and slammed it down onto the polished mahogany table right on top of Richard's useless extortion contract. The heavy thud made everyone in the room jump. "This is the real paperwork," I announced, coldly tapping the thick black spine. "This is a comprehensive forensic audit of the entire financial existence of Thomas Car Dealership, Devon Offshore Accounts, and Brittany Shell Company, Blue Horizon Investments." I looked directly at my father, who was still gripping the edge of the table, as if the floor was dropping out from underneath him. "You did not just borrow money from a bank, Dad," I explained, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "You committed aggravated identity theft against your own daughter to illegally secure government relief funds. You defrauded the Small Business Administration out of $200,000. That alone is a severe federal offense, but you did not stop there." I turned my gaze toward Devon, who was still slumped against the wood-paneled wall, breathing heavily. "You initiated a complex chain of wire fraud," Devon White continued, pointing at him. "You systematically funneled that stolen federal cash through international borders to hide it from the Internal Revenue Service. You thought you were so incredibly clever, moving money around in the shadows, but you left a massive digital footprint that took me less than 2 hours to completely unravel. And then there is the money laundering." I shifted my focus to Brittany, who was visibly shaking in her chair, holding her hands over her ears, as if that would somehow block out the truth. "You used that stolen federal money to purchase luxury waterfront real estate through a newly formed limited liability company," I stated clearly, ensuring she understood the exact severity of her actions. "You are the registered managing director of that shell company, Brittany. You are legally responsible for washing stolen government funds. That makes you an active participant in a major federal money laundering operation." My mother Barbara let out a loud, dramatic wail. "We did not know," she cried out, her voice cracking with sheer panic. "We did not understand the legal details. We just needed cash to save the business." I slammed my hand flat against the black binder, cutting her off instantly. "Ignorance is not a valid legal defense, Mom," I snapped sharply. "And it certainly does not excuse your active role in the final crime." I looked around the room, making sure every single one of them felt the absolute weight of my next words. "You conspired together to blackmail a federal witness," I declared, my voice echoing in the silent room. "You filed a fraudulent emergency custody petition, threatening to kidnap my 6-year-old daughter, unless I signed a document taking the fall for your federal crimes and surrendering 51% of my legitimate forensic accounting firm. That is severe criminal extortion." Agent Davis stepped forward, standing right beside me. He crossed his arms and looked down at my father with absolute disgust. "Your daughter is absolutely correct," Thomas Davis stated firmly. "Stealing from the Small Business Administration carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. When you add the wire fraud, the international money laundering, and the coordinated extortion plot, you are all looking at decades behind bars. You will never see the outside of a prison cell again." The reality of the 20-year sentence dropped into the room like a massive lead anvil. The absolute silence returned, broken only by the sound of Brittany crying uncontrollably. My father finally let go of the table and sank heavily into his chair, completely defeated. He looked at the federal agents and then looked at the black binder sitting on the table. His entire empire of lies, deceit, and stolen wealth had just been completely obliterated by the daughter he had spent 30 years underestimating. He tried to open his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer a bribe or beg for mercy, but no words came out. The arrogant, powerful patriarch of the family was completely gone, replaced by a terrified old man facing the absolute ruin of his own making. I stood there watching them fall apart, feeling absolutely no pity, sadness, or remorse whatsoever in my heart. They had chosen their own destructive path the exact moment they decided to maliciously hurt my innocent young daughter over a simple holiday cookie. They had consistently chosen blind greed and endless deception over genuine family love and basic loyalty. Now they were all going to pay the ultimate devastating price for their arrogance and their boundless cruelty, without any escape whatsoever. The silence in the room was suffocating following my final declaration. The words 20 years hung in the stale air like a physical execution order. I watched Devon closely. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of untouchable power and effortless wealth. He thrived on the country club lifestyle, the custom suits, the expensive sports cars, and the constant admiration of his peers. The sudden brutal realization that he was about to trade all of that for 2 decades in a federal concrete cell completely broke his mind in real time. His eyes darted wildly around the room, jumping from the armed tactical agents to my father, and finally to the thick black binder resting heavily on the mahogany table. Devon's chest began to heave with rapid, panicked breaths. A low, animalistic sound escaped the back of his throat. He pushed himself off the wood-paneled wall and stumbled forward. He did not look at me. He looked directly at Agent Davis. "Wait!" Devon gasped, raising both of his hands in the air in a gesture of frantic surrender. "Wait! You do not understand. I did not mastermind any of this. It was all Thomas. He is the one who forged the signature. He is the one who secured the federal loan. I was just following his orders. I am just a sales director. He told me I had to move the money or he would fire me and leave me with nothing." Thomas' head snapped up from the table, his eyes wide with absolute fury and disbelief. "Shut your mouth, Devon!" Thomas roared, his voice cracking with desperation. "You greedy parasite! You happily took your cut of that money to buy your luxury watches and fund your degenerate gambling trips. Do not you dare try to pin this entire operation on me." But Devon was completely unraveling. The instinct for pure self-preservation overrode any lingering sense of family loyalty or marital duty. He turned his frantic gaze toward Brittany, who was staring at her husband in complete shock. "And she knew about it too," Devon shouted, pointing a trembling finger right at his own wife. "Brittany knew the money was stolen. She set up the shell company specifically to hide the cash. She signed the real estate deeds. I will tell you everything you want to know, Davis. I will testify against both of them in federal court. I will give you every single password to the offshore accounts and the cryptocurrency wallets. Just please, you have to give me a plea deal. You have to grant me immunity." The sheer speed of his betrayal was absolutely breathtaking. In less than 60 seconds, the supposedly unbreakable bond of their wealthy family had completely disintegrated into a desperate, cutthroat scramble for survival. Brittany's face morphed from absolute terror into unhinged rage. Her perfect high society mask completely shattered. "You spineless coward!" she shrieked at the top of her lungs. "You dragged me into this mess. You told me the shell company was perfectly legal." With a sudden, violent burst of energy, Brittany lunged across the space separating them. She threw herself at Devon, her manicured nails hooking directly into the fabric of his expensive custom suit. She slapped his chest and scratched at his face, screaming hysterically about how he had ruined her perfect life. Devon stumbled backward, struggling to shove his furious wife away from him while still keeping his hands raised in surrender to the federal agents. Thomas tried to stand up to intervene, but his legs gave out and he collapsed heavily back into his leather chair, clutching his chest, struggling for air. My mother Barbara was backed into the far corner of the room, sobbing uncontrollably and pleading with the universe for someone to wake her up from this terrible nightmare. The family that had spent my entire life presenting a flawless, unified front to the world was now physically tearing each other apart in front of armed law enforcement officers. Agent Davis did not even raise his voice. He simply signaled to his tactical team. 2 heavily armored federal agents stepped forward and physically separated the thrashing couple. They pinned Devon firmly against the wood-paneled wall and wrenched his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs echoed loudly over Brittany, hysterical screaming. Another agent stepped behind Brittany, grabbing her wrists and forcefully restraining her as she continued to thrash and kick at the air. Thomas sat paralyzed in his chair, watching his golden child and his prized son-in-law being forcefully subdued and arrested in his own private country club sanctuary. I stood perfectly still, watching the utter destruction unfold before my eyes. There was no sadness. There was only justice. Agent Davis gestured to his team to finalize the arrests. Two robust agents hauled my father up from his heavy leather chair. Thomas groaned as they forcefully pulled his arms behind his back and secured his wrists with heavy steel handcuffs. The sharp, clicking sound of the locking mechanism echoed through the room like a judge striking a wooden gavel. Devin was already tightly restrained, but he was still blabbering frantically, trying to negotiate a desperate plea deal with any agent who would listen to him. He sounded absolutely pathetic. The smooth-talking, arrogant sales director was completely gone, replaced entirely by a sniveling coward. Brittany was shoved back into her chair by a stern female agent who ordered her to remain completely silent while they fully secured the premises. Richard, the corrupt family lawyer, remained pressed against the far wall, looking terrified that he might be arrested next for drafting the extortion contract. I watched my father being aggressively patted down for weapons or hidden assets. His expensive custom tuxedo jacket was violently bunched up around his shoulders, making him suddenly look incredibly small, frail, and entirely powerless. This was the exact man who had relentlessly terrorized our family with his financial control for decades. Now he was just another common elderly criminal facing the grim, uncompromising reality of the American federal justice system. Agent Davis grabbed Thomas tightly by the upper arm and physically marched him toward the splintered mahogany door. "Let us go," Davis ordered loudly, his voice cutting through the remaining tension. "Move it out right now." The heavily armed tactical team formed a tight defensive perimeter around my father and my brother-in-law, forcefully pushing them out of the wrecked private study and into the dimly lit corridor. I grabbed my black leather tote bag from the floor and followed closely behind them, walking with a steady, measured pace. We reached the top of the grand, sweeping marble staircase. The visual scene below us was absolutely surreal and deeply satisfying. The massive, opulent lobby and the adjoining main ballroom were completely packed with hundreds of wealthy country club members. Nobody had been permitted to leave the building because the federal agents had immediately locked down all the main exits to prevent anyone from destroying or tampering with potential physical evidence. The entire local high society elite was effectively trapped inside the venue, forced to bear witness to the ultimate devastating downfall of my corrupt family. The lively string quartet was completely silent. The only sound echoing through the massive cavernous space was the heavy rhythmic thud of black tactical boots marching down the polished marble steps. As we descended the grand staircase, the massive crowd of wealthy patrons parted instantly, like the Red Sea. Thomas and Devin were being forcefully frog-marched right through the very center of the lavishly decorated lobby. I clearly saw Margaret and Helen, the two snobby socialites who had openly mocked me just an hour earlier, standing frozen near a melting ice sculpture. Their mouths were hanging wide open in absolute shock and pure horror. They watched the federal agents forcefully push my father toward the main entrance doors. Thomas kept his head completely bowed, staring intently at the polished marble floor, completely unable to make eye contact with the wealthy peers he had spent his entire life desperately trying to impress. Devin was still actively crying real tears, begging the federal agents not to push him so hard in front of his important clients. The vicious whispers started almost immediately. Hushed, panicked conversations rippled rapidly through the massive crowd. People were pointing their manicured fingers and quickly pulling out their expensive cell phones to record the incredibly humiliating public spectacle. My parents had built their entire precarious social standing on the fragile illusion of vast wealth and a flawless, pristine reputation. Seeing them publicly paraded in heavy steel handcuffs in front of their trusted golf buddies and exclusive charity gala friends was the absolute ultimate destruction of their completely fake empire. My mother Barbara came stumbling blindly down the marble staircase right behind me. She aggressively pushed past a federal agent and dramatically threw herself onto the lobby floor, right in the very middle of the massive staring crowd. She did not shed a single tear for her arrested husband or her disgraced son-in-law. She slammed her fists violently against the cold marble floor and shrieked hysterically about her completely ruined social standing. "My beautiful reputation," she wailed loudly, her voice cracking with pure agonizing despair. "You have completely ruined my reputation forever, Rebecca. How am I ever going to show my face in this exclusive club ever again?" I stopped walking for a brief moment and looked down at her thrashing wildly on the floor in her ruined, expensive emerald green gown. I felt absolutely zero pity or sympathy for her. I stepped carefully around her thrashing body, completely ignoring her screams, and continued walking straight toward the heavy brass front doors. I pushed them open and stepped out onto the wide stone porch. The cold, crisp, biting winter air immediately hit my face, instantly clearing my lungs of the stale, toxic, suffocating atmosphere of the country club. I pulled my heavy winter coat tightly around my shoulders and walked steadily down the steps toward the valet circle. I did not look back even a single time. The drive back to my apartment was peaceful. Exactly 1 week later, the massive fallout from the country club raid completely dominated every single local news channel and newspaper front page in the city. The media circus was absolutely relentless and completely unforgiving. Agents spent the weekend executing search warrants across my father's luxury dealership and Devon offshore shell companies. Yellow crime scene tape barricaded the glass doors of the luxury car showroom. The morning news anchors practically buzzed with excitement as they detailed the staggering severity of the high-profile federal indictments. Thomas, Devon, and Brittany were all formally charged with aggravated identity theft, multiple counts of wire fraud, and severe money laundering. The sheer scale of their domestic laundering chain was the biggest financial scandal our wealthy suburb had ever witnessed in its history. News helicopters circled above the waterfront luxury condo Brittany had illegally purchased, broadcasting live footage of government officials seizing the property right out from under her manicured hands. It was a complete and absolute public ruin. But the criminal charges were only one part of the war they had started. They still had an active emergency custody petition filed against me in family court. On Wednesday morning, I walked up the wide concrete steps of the county courthouse wearing a sharp, tailored navy blue suit. I did not hire an attorney. I walked into family court entirely alone, carrying only a single manila folder holding my federal credentials. The courtroom was almost completely empty. My parents had originally planned to pack the gallery with their wealthy country club friends to intimidate me, but none of those friends wanted anything to do with them now. My mother Barbara was sitting alone at the petitioner table. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a single week. Her hair was unkempt, and she was wearing a faded gray sweater that looked nothing like her usual designer wardrobe. She glared at me with absolute venom as I sat down at the opposing table, but she did not dare say a single word. Thomas was not there to back her up today. He was currently sitting in a federal holding cell, having been completely denied bail due to his incredibly high flight risk. The presiding judge, a stern woman with decades of experience on the bench, entered the courtroom and took her elevated seat. She opened the thick custody file my parents' corrupt lawyer had submitted just days earlier. The judge adjusted her reading glasses and spent 2 full minutes silently reviewing the outrageous claims of my supposed mental instability and severe financial ruin. Then she looked up and shifted her piercing gaze directly toward my mother. Mrs. Barbara, the judge, began, her voice echoing sharply in the quiet room. "I see you and your husband filed an emergency petition demanding full custody of a 6-year-old child, claiming the mother is an unfit provider. I also see that your husband is currently sitting in federal lockup facing 20 years for stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from the federal government." My mother flinched as if she had been physically struck, but the judge was absolutely not finished with her reprimand. Furthermore, the judge continued, her tone growing incredibly severe. "I have just received a formal notification from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Division, confirming that the mother you attempted to smear in this petition is actually the lead forensic investigator who exposed your massive family fraud operation. It appears to this court that you aggressively attempted to weaponize the family justice system to maliciously extort a federal witness. Barbara opened her mouth to argue, but the judge instantly raised her hand demanding absolute silence. "I will not hear a single word of your pathetic excuses," the judge declared firmly. "This petition is not just entirely baseless, it is a malicious abuse of the legal process. I am officially dismissing this custody petition with extreme prejudice." The judge struck her wooden gavel hard against the sounding block. The loud crack echoed like a final devastating blow to my family entirely fake empire. "You are hereby permanently stripped of any visitation rights," the judge continued, addressing my mother directly. "Rebecca is granted full permanent and uncontested custody of her daughter Mia. If you or any member of your indicted family ever attempts to contact this child or file another frivolous motion in my courtroom, I will personally see to it that you are heavily fined for contempt of court. You are dismissed." I stood up from my table, feeling a massive wave of pure relief wash over my entire body. My mother sat frozen in her wooden chair, completely destroyed. She lost her husband, her golden child, and her granddaughter in 7 days. I walked out free. 6 months passed since that defining morning in the family court. The wheels of federal justice grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. I returned to my quiet, peaceful life with Mia completely undisturbed by the toxic drama that used to suffocate me. My forensic accounting firm actually saw a massive surge in high-profile clients after the news of the raid went fully public. But for my biological family, the harsh reality of their actions finally caught up to them in the most devastating ways imaginable. The Small Business Administration does not forgive, and it certainly does not forget. Once the federal prosecutors finalized their financial audits, the government moved swiftly to recover the stolen relief funds. Because my father had intentionally used his luxury car dealership as collateral for his fraudulent activities, the federal authorities seized every single asset tied to his name. The massive glass showroom where Devin used to swagger around selling overpriced sports cars was completely emptied out by government tow trucks in a single afternoon. Thomas was sitting in a federal penitentiary awaiting his formal sentencing when the bank finally foreclosed on the family mansion. The sprawling brick estate with the heated swimming pool and the manicured lawns was put up for public auction. My mother, Barbara, was forcefully evicted by county sheriffs. She had to stand on the sidewalk and watch strangers carry her expensive antique furniture and imported rugs out to moving vans to be liquidated to pay off my father massive legal debts. She was forced to move into a tiny, cramped apartment on the complete opposite side of the city, relying entirely on a meager Social Security check. She was completely shunned by her former high society friends, who now pretended they had never even met her. Devin did not fare any better. His frantic attempt to throw my father under the bus and secure a generous plea deal completely blew up in his face. The federal prosecutors did not need his testimony because my forensic audit had already provided them with an absolutely airtight case. Without the leverage of exclusive information, Devin was left completely exposed to the maximum penalties for international money laundering. He was currently sitting in a maximum security county jail, waiting for the judge to hand down a sentence that would likely keep him locked in a concrete cell until he was an old man. But perhaps the most spectacular downfall belonged entirely to my sister Brittany. The absolute golden child of the family was suddenly completely stripped of her endless financial safety net. As the registered managing director of the money laundering shell company, all of her personal assets were immediately frozen by the federal government. The luxury waterfront condo she had purchased with stolen cash was seized and sold at auction. Brittany immediately filed for a messy, highly publicized divorce from Devin, desperately trying to distance herself from his criminal charges, but it was far too late. The damage to her precious public image was completely irreversible. Her heavily curated Instagram account, which she used to flaunt her designer clothes and lavish vacations, was permanently deleted after angry investors and online trolls flooded her comment sections with relentless mockery. Without her wealthy husband, and without our parents' deep pockets, Brittany was forced to face the real world for the very first time in her 35 years of existence. She had zero marketable skills, no college degree, and a pending felony indictment hanging heavily over her head. Nobody in her elite social circle was willing to hire her. Last week, a former colleague of mine mentioned seeing Brittany working as a cashier at a discount retail store on the outskirts of the city. The woman who once stood in my apartment and arrogantly demanded 51% of my successful business was now wearing a cheap polyester uniform and scanning clearance items for minimum wage just to afford her basic groceries. She had to take the public bus to work because her luxury SUV had been repossessed months ago. The complete role reversal was almost poetic. They had spent my entire life trying to convince me that I was a massive failure who would never survive without their generous support. They had constantly belittled my hard work and mocked my career choices. But when the dust finally settled and the stolen money was stripped away, their true, complete incompetence was fully exposed to the entire world. They were nothing without their lies and their fraudulent schemes. I did not gloat, and I did not reach out to mock them. Their natural consequences were punishment enough. I simply focused entirely on building a beautiful, stable future for my daughter, completely free from their poisonous influence. I knew I had finally won my true freedom. The transition from that chaotic winter into the bright warmth of the following summer brought incredible changes to my professional life. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my brand-new high-rise corner office, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. The expansion of my forensic accounting firm had been massive. With the highly publicized exposure of the dealership money laundering ring, my reputation as an uncompromising and brilliant auditor absolutely skyrocketed. I moved my entire team into a premium downtown commercial space, leaving the cramped apartment office behind forever. My personal desk was a sleek expanse of polished glass, completely free of red pushpins and tangled string. I held a steaming mug of artisanal dark roast coffee and watched the tiny cars moving on the highway far below. Life was incredibly peaceful and perfectly organized. The sharp ringing of my private desk phone broke the quiet atmosphere. I walked over and glanced at the caller identification display. It was an automated operator from a restricted number indicating an incoming collect call. My private direct line was unlisted, meaning whoever was calling had gone through significant effort to bypass my administrative assistants. I tapped the speaker button out of sheer professional curiosity. An automated voice announced that there was a collect call from a restricted facility, but then I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy, sobbing breath. I pressed the button to accept the charges. "Rebecca! My mother?" Barbara wailed, her voice instantly echoing through the spacious modern office. It sounded thin and incredibly fragile, completely stripped of the arrogant command she used to wield like a weapon. "Please do not hang up," she begged frantically. "I have been trying to get through to you for weeks. I am so sorry, Rebecca. I am just so incredibly sorry." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and listened to her cry. The sound that used to send me into immediate panic now registered as nothing more than background noise. "Where are you, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "I am at a motel out on the interstate," she sobbed, loudly blowing her nose. "It is awful here, Rebecca. The heater is broken and there are bugs everywhere. The government took absolutely everything. My pension is entirely gone to pay for your father legal restitution. I cannot even afford my heart medication this month. Brittany will not return any of my calls. She blames me for the fact that she has to work at a grocery store. She screamed at me and changed her phone number. You are the only one I have left. You are my daughter. Please, I know you are doing so well now. I saw your new office address online. Can you just wire me a little bit of cash? Just enough to get a decent apartment. We are family, Rebecca. You have to forgive me." I let her pathetic rambling fill the room for a long moment. She was trying to play the exact same manipulative notes she had used my entire life. She was attempting to leverage my empathy and weaponize my sense of filial duty. But those emotional buttons had been completely disconnected months ago. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I felt absolutely nothing but a terrifying calm. I picked up the phone receiver, turning off the speaker function so she could hear the absolute finality in my voice. Mom, I said quietly, cutting through her endless stream of excuses. You do not get to invoke the word family when you suddenly need a financial bailout. You permanently forfeited that right the night you tried to extort me and take my daughter away to protect your stolen wealth. A heavy silence fell over the line. I could hear her ragged, panicked breathing. You spent 30 years prioritizing your own image over my well-being. I continued, my voice dropping to a cold, unyielding tone. You allowed Dad to steal my identity and you proudly bragged about taking over my company. You placed all your bets on Brittany. You chose your golden child. Now you reap exactly what you sow. But Rebecca, please! She gasped, her voice breaking into a high-pitched, desperate whine. I am your mother. You cannot just leave me here to rot. I did not raise my voice and I did not argue. I have a meeting to get to, I stated simply. Goodbye, Barbara. I gently placed the receiver back onto the cradle, severing the connection entirely. I immediately opened my phone system settings and permanently blocked the number. I established a titanium boundary right then and there, ensuring she could never infiltrate my peaceful life ever again. I walked back over to the expansive windows and let the warm sunlight wash over my face. I thought about Mia, who was currently at her prestigious new school, thriving and perfectly happy. The toxic generational cycle of manipulation and greed was completely broken. I had successfully rebuilt my life from the ashes of their lies, and nobody would ever dictate my worth again. I left the office precisely at 5 o'clock. There was no longer any need to work grueling late-night shifts to keep a struggling firm afloat. I rode the glass elevator down to the private parking garage and climbed into my brand new car. The drive home was smooth and relaxing. I navigated away from the towering skyscrapers and headed toward the quiet, upscale suburban neighborhood I now called home. I turned onto my street and pulled into the wide paved driveway of a beautiful two-story modern house. It was surrounded by lush green trees and featured a large, secure fenced backyard where Mia could safely play. This house was not bought with stolen government funds or shady offshore wire transfers. Every single brick of this home was paid for by my own relentless hard work and my uncompromising integrity. I unlocked the heavy wooden front door and stepped into the bright, welcoming foyer. The air inside was warm and smelled absolutely incredible. There was no lingering scent of stale bourbon or suffocating designer perfume like the spaces my parents used to inhabit. Instead, the house was filled with the sweet, comforting aroma of vanilla and baked sugar. I kicked off my heels and walked softly down the hardwood hallway toward the expansive kitchen. The sound of bright, ringing laughter echoed off the high vaulted ceilings. It was the most beautiful sound in the entire world. I leaned against the doorframe and watched the scene unfold. My trusted senior partner, Diana, was standing by the massive island wearing a flour-dusted apron over her professional work clothes. She was playfully tapping flour onto Mia's nose. Mia was sitting on a tall wooden stool, giggling uncontrollably. Spread out across the smooth granite counter were dozens of freshly baked sugar cookies covered in vibrant pink frosting and colorful rainbow sprinkles. This was not a stiff, formal holiday gathering governed by strict rules and invisible landmines. This was just a random Tuesday evening filled with genuine, unscripted joy. "Mommy, you are home!" Mia cheered loudly. She hopped down from the stool and ran across the kitchen, throwing her arms tightly around my waist. I knelt down and hugged her, breathing in the sweet scent of vanilla radiating from her hair. "Look what Diana and I made," Mia announced proudly, pointing a sticky finger toward the kitchen island. "We made all the cookies in the whole world." I stood up and smiled at Diana, who gave me a warm, knowing wink. "We certainly did." Diana laughed, wiping her hands on a towel. "I figured we needed to celebrate your massive new corporate account at the firm. Go ahead and grab one before the frosting completely sets." I walked over to the counter and picked up a large star-shaped cookie. It was soft and perfectly warm. I handed another one directly to Mia. She took a massive bite, getting pink frosting all over her cheeks. No one slapped her hand away. No one yelled at her or called her greedy. No one used a simple baked good as a vicious weapon to assert dominance or inflict psychological pain. I took a bite of my own cookie and let the profound sweetness wash over me. In that exact moment, the final lingering ghost of that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner completely evaporated from my mind. Watching Mia laugh with frosting on her face, I realized something incredibly profound about the true nature of family. For 30 years, I had been aggressively brainwashed to believe that family was entirely defined by shared genetics and blind obedience. I was taught that blood relatives were entitled to endless forgiveness, no matter how deeply they betrayed you or how ruthlessly they exploited your entire life. But my parents and my sister had proven that biology means absolutely nothing when it is entirely devoid of basic human empathy. True family is not a restrictive obligation you are simply born into. True family is an active daily choice. It is built entirely on a solid foundation of mutual respect, unwavering support, and absolute safety. Diana was my family. The loyal colleagues who stood by me were my family. And most importantly, Mia and I were a complete family all on our own. I had walked through absolute hell to protect my little girl from the toxic cycle that had trapped me for decades. I fought back against severe financial extortion, federal fraud, and vicious psychological warfare. I did not just survive their highly coordinated ambush, I utterly dismantled their entire corrupt universe. As I stood in my beautiful, secure kitchen, listening to the joyful sounds of my healthy, happy child, I realized that I had finally achieved the absolute ultimate revenge. It was not the federal indictments, the seized mansions, or the ruined high society reputations that brought me peace. The ultimate revenge was simply living this massively successful, completely untouchable life. I took another bite of the sugar cookie and smiled, knowing that the bright open future belonged entirely to us.